I'm Charmaine Champion Shaw. Everyone calls me Charlie. We're here in Indianapolis at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, or what we commonly refer to as IUPUI. We're lucky enough to have the wonderful Paul DeMaine and Liz Gray here for our third annual IUPUI Native American Indian Education Conference. I'm Southern Cheyenne, grew up here though, lifetime Hoosier, grew up in East Chicago, Indiana, came down to Indianapolis in 2005 where I met Dr. Johnny P. Flynn, the first PhD Native American that I'd ever met. And together we created the education conference. Johnny would be the one to tell you that there are no major Indian conferences in the area. And so we do have...
In the area or Indiana? Do you see anything
There
going
are
on?
no federally recognized tribes within the state of Indiana. We do have the Pokagon, Potawatomi, who are in Dowagiac, Michigan, whose territorial tribal lands are in Indiana because, of course, the tribe existed long before the state borders did. And so we have the tribal area is in northwest Indiana, central northeast Indiana. And so the Pokagon are here. We also have the Miami of Indiana tribes, the Wea tribes, one Wea tribe in Clinton and one Wea tribe in Terre Haute. One in Clinton, one in Lafayette. And so we had a two-day conference where Thursday we focused on the IUPUI New American Indian Program, where we're working to develop American Indian certificates and minors, Native American studies that are not based in anthropology, based in communication studies and religious studies and in different areas of interest, where we're not focusing so much on just the history component, but how the contributions of Native Americans are vital still today in the way that we look at medicine, in the way that we look at communication studies, and how we are relevant still. And so the education conference focused on the student presentations Thursday, and we had student discussions on Native American spirituality to help addictions. And
some of these presentations were based on papers or thesis or research projects?
Absolutely. Through our American Indian program, we have students that are involved in Native American philosophy classes, Native American communication, Native American religious studies. There are some prehistory and Native American anthropology classes as well. But the students through these classes were able to compete to present their papers at the student portion of our conference. And so we were able to choose 6 students for their presentations. We were very excited to have students from off of our campus as well, and so we had a group of students from Indiana University in Bloomington also present on the racialized mascots from North Dakota as well. So it was the presentations and the were from papers or from presentations that they had created for different classes.
You have a fairly large campus here. Number of students and the number of Native people that are on campus?
There are about 33,000 on the campus of IUPUI. We have 185 self-identified Native Americans, and then we have, I believe the last count was 22 enrolled Native American students here on the campus. And so it's one of the problems that we consistently fight here, because the way that our university is currently operating is that for the amount of students that we have, that we can remain with no Native American faculty. There's two enrolled Native American faculty members here on campus. And so the argument of the university is that if you're 0% students, then 0% faculty is fine. And what we found in the last 3 years in creating relevant Native American programs, where when we talk about beadworking, it's not a craft. We talk about the cultural component of beadworking. When we talk about ancestry workshops, we talk about the myths and realities of retracing your ancestry. And so when we talk about this relevant programming, we've created these opportunities and actually seen an increase of 71% of our enrolled students in the last 2 years.
Can you take a subject like that and briefly just say beadwork, mathematics and geometric designs, genealogy, DNA research? It's not just ancestral history, but the whole dynamics of genes and cells and transfer
Absolutely.
of DNA and traits and all those kinds of things.
Well, and we found, one of the things that we found with the student presentations and with our students in general, applying Native American concepts to theories. I'm in communication studies, and so we were talking about communication theories that would talk about how members would come into a group and go out of a group. And the representational model, years past, has always been a circle. And so when we applied Native American, our Native American process to it, we say, really when you're talking about these creation of groups, it's more cyclical, it's more spiral. And so we saw this redevelopment of a model using this Native American philosophy that really made a lot of sense. And so it's wonderful to see that kind of process happen and not just be, not a historical Native American studies anthropology kind of line of thinking.
You've been here for how many years now?
I've been a student on the campus since 1995. I really became engaged after the death of my father, got engaged in Native American affairs and issues and awareness here on campus in 2005. And so been full-time here and full-time advocating for the last 3 years.
And you've seen some incremental changes going on.
I'm graduating in December with my master's, and while I'll still be teaching here, I'm moving on to IU Bloomington for my doctorate work in communication studies. And someone posed the question at the beginning of the conference to me, have I seen any impact? In the 3 years, have I seen any impact of any of the things that we've done here? And it's a tough question because, we all know that making systemic changes are truly just about that ripple of a little stone. And so what I can say on a positive note is, like Obama, Native Americans are in the language now. When we talked about minorities when I was here, it was only African Americans and Latinos. Now, whether it's because they see me in the room or they see our students in the room, it's African Americans, Latino Americans, and Native Americans. For the first time in our university history, we have a multicultural center. And so while I love the state of Indiana, I like to say too, as far as minorities, we're about 50 years behind the times. Our first multicultural center here at IUPUI just opened in May, but there is a space for Native Americans there. And our students have a place where they can go and feel comfortable in the way that the room is set up. And most important for me, I think, growing up, knowing that there were Native American scholars out there, they can see people who look like them and come from places and families and see that they can succeed. Because if it wasn't for people like Johnny Flynn, I don't know that I would be going for my doctorate either. And so I think that's really important.
You think you've had these conferences, this is the third annual one? Do you think you've changed the perspective or life of one student in a positive way in those last 3 years?
I would think so. In fact, I can say so. I can speak to the very small Native American population that we have here, that it has made a significant difference. When we first came out, the way that the university approached anything Native American was so simplistic and linear that most Native American students remained, like Sherman Alexie calls, the ambiguous other. You just blended in, and people said, "Oh, are you Mexican?" "Oh, yeah," and just kind of went on. Now, we definitely have seen an increase of Native American students say no, and not only am I Native American, but I am Cheyenne or I am Ponca, so that they are identifying themselves much more true. I also think that we've made an incredible impact with our other students of color, students who are advocates and advocating for, as an African American student for African Americans, or Latino or Latina for Latinos and Latinas, that they include Native Americans in their dialogue, and that's important as a small population that we have those kind of allies.
I try to measure things by the impact of one person, so I think you've been successful if you've impacted one person. personally. Thank you, Charmaine, for talking to us today.
Thank you very much, Paul.